Gay Pride Month is upon us. Let me ask you a question you've probably never been asked. What did the Apostle Paul and gay activists know that most of us don't? What can Christians learn from gay pride? This is Brad Bright. Welcome to the God is the Issue podcast, where I show how God is the issue in every issue. Do you realize that when you want to advance a cause or a belief, controversy is your friend? It was the Apostle Paul's secret weapon. It's also a critical part of the process that gay activists use to normalize their behavior in the minds of many Americans. Now, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, how does creating controversy help anything? It just makes people mad and then they react. There's a key word here: react. Remember that word. I'll come back to it in a moment. In my book, God is the Issue, I discuss the rules of social change. The sixth rule is controversy is my friend. Why is it my friend? Because you cannot advance a cause without controversy, without harnessing controversy. Now, for most people, this is counterintuitive. I get that. But history demonstrates it over and over and over again. Controversy forces people to react to you, more precisely, to your message. There's that word react again. As long as they're reacting to your message, they're not advancing their message. As long as they're playing defense, they're not driving forward on offense. As long as they're trying to stop you, they're not pushing their agenda forward. You see, as long as they're reacting to your message, no matter how stridently, you're in control of the conversation. That is critical to understand. Controversy is your friend as long as you stay on message. This forces those who disagree with you to try to stop you, more specifically, to stop your message. Now, if you never get any pushback, it means one of two things: either that no one heard you, or that you're not saying anything contrary to what your listeners already believe. But if, as a follower of Jesus, you never get any pushback, it's because you're either not talking about Jesus or you're not talking about Jesus to anyone outside the Christian echo chamber. You may not have noticed, but the real Jesus can be pretty controversial in today's culture. Jesus didn't just say, love your neighbor. He also said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. In other words, there's only one path to God. And if you disagree with Jesus, your truth is a fairy tale. Now, don't point the finger at me. Jesus is the one who said it. I'm simply quoting him. You see, everyone loves it when Jesus silences the sanctimonious religious leaders with, he who is without sin cast the first stone. Yay for our side. But our culture convulses when he says, go and sin no more. How intolerant. See, Jesus loved people, but he hated sin. He never compromised God's love, and he never compromised God's truth. Now, if Christians would shine the light of Jesus as often and as unashamedly as homosexuals promote gay pride, what do you think would happen? I don't mean we do it in a mean and bullying way like they often do, where they come out of the closet and then tell everyone who disagrees with them to crawl into the closet. I don't mean we should threaten people like gays did when they publicly chanted, we're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children. I mean Christians unapologetically talking about the real issue, Jesus. Christians who enthusiastically talk about how following Christ empowers them with a peace, perfect purpose, and joy they couldn't find anywhere else. What do you think would happen? It would create some controversy, wouldn't it? There'd be some blowback. Some of us might get canceled. Now, I've been canceled on some platforms before for talking about God. All that means is I was articulating a message that is counter to the culture. That's what Jesus did, and they tried to cancel him too. See, the Apostle Paul harnessed controversy to advance the gospel, just like homosexuals and transgenders generate controversy to advance their cause today. The Apostle Paul and the early Christians created controversy everywhere they went, not because they were mean, but because they were clear. But here's what controversy does for you. It creates curiosity. It generates conversation. Everybody wants to know what's going on. And in effect, it hands you a megaphone. It's free marketing. See, active opposition only helps enlarge your platform, causing more people to pay attention, to see you and to hear you. But here's the caveat. You must stay on message, or else it does you no good. In fact, it'll hurt you. It will hurt your cause. As soon as your opposition gets you to react, that is, draws you off message, you lose. Let me give you a classic example that I've used before to illustrate the power of controversy publicly harnessed. After leaving politics, I spent 7 years at the University of Washington in Seattle on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ. At the beginning of my third year, a group of angry homosexual bullies came after us. This is what happened. On Wednesday, the second week of school, a young man by the name of Todd came up to one of the tables, the tables which we set up in front of dorms every fall so that interested students could sign up for a Bible study. And Todd said he'd like to sign up for a Bible study. Then he said, "I'm gay. Can I still join?" The sophomore co-ed sitting behind the table responded, "Sure, we'd love to have you in a Bible study." Then Todd said, "Well, seeing as how I'm gay, is there anything I wouldn't be allowed to do?" Here's how she responded. She said, "We think the Bible is very clear about qualifications for leadership in the body of Christ, so you wouldn't be allowed to lead a Bible study, but you're welcome to join us." Todd responded, "I'm offended," and stomped off. The next day, Thursday, the lead article in the campus newspaper proclaimed Campus Crusade for Christ homophobic. The day after that, the lead editorial demanded that Campus Crusade for Christ no longer be recognized as a student organization, accusing us of invidious speech. That's when my prior experiences in politics paid off. First, I immediately recognized that it was a classic setup. We'd been ambushed by a planned operation. But because of my years in politics, instead of being intimidated, I knew exactly how to respond. We pulled our staff team together that weekend, briefed them, and produced a one-page, quick and dirty flyer that began with "diversity in the university" in big print with a circle and a slash through it. The flyer went on to say that there was a small vocal minority on campus who talked about diversity, but then turned around and tried to censor the speech of any speech that they deemed objectionable. We pointed out their hypocrisy, intolerance, and attempt at censorship, all of which were true. Then we ended the front page with this question: what are they afraid you might hear? And when you opened the flyer, it read, "God loves you." And it went on from there. We handed out 10,000 of the flyers at all the major choke points of campus the following Monday. And here was the most telling indicator. We saw very few of the flyers on the ground or in the trash cans around campus. The controversy that the gays started, but we hijacked, had done its job. Students wanted to know what was going on. We had their full attention. The rest of the fall, the students involved with Campus Crusade had phenomenal opportunities to talk about Jesus in their dorms because of the controversy. We trained them to not talk about homosexuality, but how to co-opt the controversy to talk about Jesus, and it worked incredibly well. Just before Christmas break, the editor of the editorial page, who was an out-of-the-closet gay, wrote an editorial in which he wrote that the newspaper had printed the best of our letters to the editor, but we had still not answered the question. Of course, the question he wanted us to answer was, why are you guys so homophobic? But my time in politics had taught me that you never answer a question that doesn't advance your cause. Now, I'm sure you've seen many politicians say, "That's a good question, but I think the real issue is," and then they talk about whatever they want to talk about. I also learned that from reading how Jesus responded to his enemies. He always used their questions as a platform to advance his agenda, which was, who is God and why does it matter? So we simply co-opted the controversy to talk about Jesus. And it worked so well that when students returned from Christmas, or after Christmas, our assailants completely disappeared. You see, our attackers had finally figured out that we weren't going to be baited into reacting. In fact, we intentionally ignored their issue altogether. They were simply broadening our platform for us by feeding the controversy. And since we had trained the students to stay on message, we were able to effectively co-opt the platform to advance the cause of Christ. It took our attackers 3+ months to figure out that they were actually helping us proclaim Jesus. Now, a recent example of controversy, which we've all seen, were the tent cities that trained agitators and college students set up on university campuses around the country. They were aggressively creating controversy on purpose for a purpose. Now, I didn't agree with them, but they had my full attention. I wanted to see what they were going to do next. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You can't look away. Now, I've never actually seen a train wreck, but I have seen a car going 80 miles per hour broadside a semi-truck. It wasn't pretty, but I couldn't look away. You see, intense controversy has the same effect. The tent city agitators were driving their message, which was free Palestine, from the river to the sea, while virtually drowning out the other side. They owned the news cycle day after day after day. You see, controversy properly harnessed forces people to see you and to hear you, but it doesn't force them to agree with you, does it? There is one more thing you must understand about controversy that will help explain why controversy advances your message. When controversy first erupts, what happens? Well, it seems like everybody reacts. People get mad. There tends to be a huge backlash at first. Notice I said at first. But assuming you framed your message well and you stay on message, what happens next? The conversation starts to move from reacting and backlash to discussing. Instead of saying, they're nuts, many people start saying, well, I don't really agree with them, but they have a good point over here or here or here. And if you keep driving your message, there will always be those who react, but over time, others will start discussing the pros and the cons, even if they don't fully agree with you. This is what you want to happen. You want to drive conversation around your issue, in our case, Jesus. But you have to stay on message to get there. You have to ride out the initial firestorm. It takes some fortitude. But if you do it, eventually it pays off, assuming you stay on message. You see, first, they hear your message. Second, they react to your message. And third, they discuss your message. That's the sequence. That's how controversy drives change. It is that simple. But what's my point? Christians are far too afraid of any kind of controversy. We think it's not very spiritual to create controversy because it's not nice. But you see, Jesus was so controversial that they killed him. He articulated a message that was counterculture. He wasn't mean. Well, sometimes he rebuked the Pharisees, but for the most part, it was simply his message that offended people. In Acts chapter 17, Paul and the other believers were accused of upsetting the world when they came to Thessalonica. You see, their reputation preceded them. Now, Jesus and Paul did not set out to create controversy, but they were not afraid to use it either. See, when controversy came, it amplified their message over any other competing messages. Now, most Christians in the West today are either too busy, too intimidated, too scared, too apathetic, or we just don't know what to say or do. See, Christians want to be nice guys, which is generally good. However, Jesus didn't say be nice to your neighbor. No, he said love your neighbor. See, love your neighbor enough to tell him what he needs to hear, not just what he wants to hear. Be a true friend, not a sycophant, not a brown noser. Be more like Jesus. Never compromise love and never compromise truth. Now, here's the sad reality. Christians are not as committed to shining their light for Jesus as gays are at demanding society embrace them. They draw a red line in the sand and force everyone to choose. In fact, they often come out of the closet and demand that everyone who disagrees with them go into the closet. Gay activists push through their fear of a negative reaction because their agenda is far more important to them than their fear. Now, that's an admirable quality that we should learn from. Am I saying we should shine our light for Jesus by getting into people's faces? No. In fact, we should be as gracious as possible. But we should never sacrifice clarity in an attempt to be charitable. Here's the key principle. Be like Jesus. Never compromise love and never compromise truth. You see, when you speak the truth in love, it pushes your listeners to react to your message rather than to you. Be gracious, but be clear. But I know you're thinking, what does that look like in real life? Well, first, try to always make it about Jesus. As much as possible, say, Jesus said rather than I believe. You want people to react to Jesus, not to you. You're not the authority. Jesus is. For instance, you could say, I believe there's only one way to God. Or you could ask, when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but through me, what do you think he meant? See, now they're having a conversation with Jesus, not you, and that's exactly what you want. Now, you will often get a reaction because our culture strongly wants to believe that there are many paths to God. But Jesus' statement disrupts that belief. It creates emotional disequilibrium in your listener. Now, if they get mad at you for being so narrow-minded, simply remind them that Jesus made the statement, not you. Do they really believe Jesus was narrow-minded? Make the conversation about what Jesus thinks, not about what you think. Now, another way to have that same conversation is to create a clear juxtaposition, something like this. Muhammad, the founder of Islam, said, kill the infidel. Jesus, the founder of Christianity, said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Muhammad modeled what he meant when he slaughtered 600 Jews at Medina. Jesus modeled what he meant when he died on the cross for friend and foe alike. So maybe you can help me understand why some people feel that following Muhammad, who advocated violence, is the same thing as following Jesus, who taught love. I don't get that. You see, you've held up Jesus as the authority and then asked him to explain why Muhammad, who advocates killing people, is an equal authority. Again, that will likely create, emotional disequilibrium in your listener. They may react, but remind them that all you're asking is that they help you better understand how such radically divergent paths can both lead to God. Now, here's one final example. I'm sure you've heard people say God is love or God loves everyone as a way to justify immoral behavior. I mean, gays love to say that. That's their trump card to shut you up. But what they are clearly saying is that a loving God will let them do anything they want, and therefore you should too. Now, when they say that, what you want to help them define what love is and what it isn't. So respond something like this. When you say God is love, do you mean that God will let you do anything you want? To me, that sounds a lot like the if you love me, you'll let me ploy that teenage guys often use to coax their girlfriend into bed. So here's my question. Is God an enabler or a coach? You see, an enabler gives you what you want, even if it's harmful to you. A good coach pushes you to do what you don't want to do in order to help you to improve. It sounds like you're talking about the enabler view of love, or did I misunderstand? So you've given them two contrasting definitions of God's love, and you've invited them into a conversation about those two definitions. See, talking about God's love is exactly the conversation you want to have. And best of all, they brought it up. See, that's a great platform to be able to launch into the bigger conversation about why Jesus came into earth in the first place, because of his love for us. Those are some examples of how to never compromise love and never compromise truth, just like Jesus. I want you to notice that first, I typically make a clarifying statement where I define or redefine the issue. But then I always follow it with a question to invite them into conversation. Inviting people into real conversation is critical to helping move people in their thinking. It communicates, I value what you think, and therefore, by implication, I value you. It's a skill you can develop with a little bit of thought and practice. And folks, don't be afraid to test out different approaches with good friends. But again, the fundamental problem is that gays believe in their cause more passionately than most Christians believe in Jesus. I know this is true because it is human nature to talk about what you are most passionate about. See, homosexuals shamelessly celebrate their sexual brokenness with pride and gusto. On the other hand, most Christians talk more about immigration, the economy, abortion, politics, racism, or feeding the poor more than they do about Jesus. What does that tell you? Until Christians become more passionate about Jesus than homosexuals are about gay pride, until Christians become more passionate about Jesus than Democrats are about abortion, until Christians become more passionate about Jesus than Republicans are about capitalism, until Christians become more passionate about Jesus than progressives are about fighting systemic oppression, America will continue hurtling toward her doom. But what gives me hope is that many Christians are starting to shine the light of Jesus more than the light of cultural Christianity. Now, don't get me wrong. I am passionately pro-life. I was once one of those unwanted children who so frequently get aborted. I'm ardently free market. I fervently believe that any foreigner who joins the American family should do so legally. I am zealous about defending and protecting the U.S. Constitution, and I love America. But I love Jesus more, far more. Until Christians in America come to love Jesus more than even the freedoms they enjoy, America will continue her descent into moral and economic collapse. But if Christians will start making God the issue, just as most gays make homosexuality the issue, then there will be hope. So this month, as homosexuals celebrate their sexual brokenness, let's celebrate Jesus even more. Let's talk about him to our neighbors. You don't have to be obnoxious. You just need to start the conversation. Invite your neighbor over for dinner, and during dinner ask, what do you think America's biggest problem is, and what do you think the solution is? If you'll listen patiently, at some point they'll probably ask you, "Well, what do you think?" So glad you asked. And you respond, "Well, I think America's fundamental problem is spiritual. We've forgotten Jesus' words to love God and do unto others as we would have them do unto us." Let me ask you, what do you think Jesus meant? And how do you think that might solve a lot of our problems, both as individuals and a nation? Do you see how easy that was to move the conversation to Jesus and the spiritual dimension of life? You ask them the question that you want them to ask you, a question that will allow you to move the conversation to spiritual things. Now, if they don't eventually ask, then you can say, I wonder if you'd be open to hearing my thoughts on that. Now, as long as they're interested, keep moving the conversation that way. No need to force it. See, unlike many homosexual activists, you don't need to bully anyone or get in anyone's face. Be winsome, and folks, enjoy the conversation. Enjoy getting to know your neighbor. See, your goal is not to convert anyone. It's not. Only the Spirit of God can do that. Your goal is simply to look for people who are looking for God and then introduce them to their Creator when they're ready. If anyone has something worth celebrating, folks, it's those of us who've experienced the power of the cross in our lives. We just need to start letting people know what it is that we celebrate. And folks, there are many, many ways you can do that. I would love to hear from you. What is the best question that you have used or heard of to help start spiritual conversations about Jesus? I would love to hear it, and I imagine there are others who would love to hear it too. God is the issue in every issue, especially when it comes to celebrating God's love and God's truth. This is Brad Bright. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe. And when subscribing, don't forget to click on the bell so you'll be notified whenever I publish a new podcast. God bless. And remember, you have something worth celebrating and sharing.